Okay, I think I'd start just by introducing Tricia, and I'm sure some other people will join us whilst we're going through intros. But a little bit of background about Tricia. But first of all, I'll just start with some of the tech stuff. So folks, whilst you're watching the webinar, please feel free to type away questions in the Q&A. We're saving questions for the end, but type them when you think of them, and then we'll pick them up just as soon as we can and at the end and ask Tricia those questions. And that means we can also put together any similar questions. So please type away in the Q&A. We're recording as always, so the recording should be available towards the end of tomorrow or Saturday, and obviously you can come back and re-watch and make sure you've remembered the key bits of the lecture that we're going to hear today. And finally, there's a questionnaire at the end, which we'd love it if you just click into. It takes literally a minute and just gives us the opportunity to find out what you liked and any other suggestions for webinars in the future. So that will come up right at the end of the webinar, but we'll remind you again then. So quick intros for Tricia. We're delighted to welcome Tricia to Horse Tribe. You did a podcast for us a little while ago, didn't you, Tricia? So I would recommend listening to the podcast as well if you want to find out a bit more about Tricia. But Tricia's here today representing BETA, the British Equestrian Trade Association, where she's a Lorrinry consultant and field officer. Tricia's previously owned her own saddlery shop and specialised in Lorrinry and saddlery fitting. And you've also taught and lectured to students at Capel Manor College for a number of years as well, I believe. So Tricia, really warm welcome to Horse Tribe. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us all tonight, and we can't wait to hear what you've got to say. I'm going to be certainly fascinated. This is a subject that the last time I learned anything about bitting was in Pony Club days, which is far too long ago to be able to talk about. So thank you, Tricia. I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Heidi, and welcome everybody. It's great to be with you. And welcome to a Horse Owner's Guide to Better Bitting. It's a massive subject and we only have a short period of time. So I'm hoping to give you some bullet points to help you go away with a wider perspective of things to think about when you're considering bitting and bridling your horse. Sorry, Heidi, but my slide won't progress for some reason.
That's no good. I can't. Let me see if I can control it from here.
Oh, here we go. We've gone. Did you do that or did I?
No, I think you did it. It's magic.
Lovely. Well, I've obviously got the Cornish gremlins in, so hopefully they won't appear again. So a Horse Owner's Guide to Better Bitting. Some of the things we're going to be covering are the indicators for how you would have an idea if your horse isn't being happy in his bitting and his bridling, because if you don't know or acknowledge or understand that, then you're not going to be able to appreciate it and consider how you can do something about it. Also trying to understand a little bit more about the mechanics of bitting and the bitting bridling pressure points, with a guidance to how to select a bit and some of the considerations you might take into place, and then thinking about routine mouth assessments and the 3 different types I want to talk to you about. Then thinking, all importantly, how to introduce a new bit to your horse, and of course the importance of the correct bit, bridle and tack fitting as an overall perspective, and last but most definitely not least, the role of the rider. So who are BETA? I mean, they're enabling me to be speaking to you today. BETA, we are the British Equestrian Trade Association, as Heidi's mentioned. We work to support the equestrian industry with members that are manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers who you may well walk into store with or shop online, and also associate members from across a range of equestrian professionals. And along the bottom gives you an idea of some of the different projects that we've worked closely to help with the horse industry. So what are our objectives when we're bitting our horses and the goals of sound equitation? Well, we bit and bridle horses naturally because we want to have some control. There's not much good heading out on a cross-country course if your horse disappears back to the horsebox park. But we want to have control of speed and direction, but also overwhelmingly to enhance our performance. That said, we want to be able to optimize the horse and rider communication with his comfort and welfare as a major priority, and remembering that communication is about listening as much as it is for asking. So we've got to learn to be very receptive to our horses. And about rider accountability, we need to be empathetic with our horses. We need to work so that we are as skilled as riders as we possibly can be, so that we can have also a sound overall perspective of horsemanship. So all of the aspects that affect the horse come together so we can take everything into account. And in that way, we're much more likely to achieve the performance that we're wishing for, whether you're a leisure rider or whether you're doing high competition work, so we can be much better synergy with our horse. There are so many bits on the market. It's incredible. There are new ones coming on all the time. I don't blame anybody for being bemused and confused about bitting of the horse. But what I do think is really exciting is that so many of the manufacturers now are working very carefully to do research and design bits that really have a focus of requirement at the end of it, so that they're thinking, this is an issue we've got with some horses, how can we design something to cater for that and produce them in that way, and supporting it with sound research. So I do think it's a very, very constructive time in our industry. And also, because bits have become much more of a focus, as with bridling, we're seeing equestrian professionals much more able to help us with this particular area of equine expertise. That said, here we've got a Celtic bit from about 2,000 years ago. And if you look at the ones at the top and the ones at the bottom, they're not actually that different. So sometimes things don't change too dramatically. So what are the indicators of a horse that is perhaps unhappily bitted or bridled? Or it may be something further to do with this tack as well. I think one of the first things is the horse you're working with, or the horse you may own, make sure that you know him, that you're observant of him, that you know what's normal for him, because then if it changes, you're going to pick up on that much more quickly. I've got a shopping list of different things that might be indicators for you, and I'll work through them. So quidding, what do I mean by that? If you notice lumps of food that have fallen out of the horse's mouth, he's tried to masticate his food and it hasn't quite worked properly and it's fallen out of his mouth, you might see that outside his stable door or by his manger or in the stable, then that's a big indicator to you that there's something not happy in his mouth. So it's not so much a bitting issue, it's more a mouth tooth issue, but it's again going to indicate there's something you need to work on, because if he's doing that, he's certainly not going to be happy with his bitting. I've mentioned already, if you have a horse that's normally very pleasant, it becomes grumpy and irritated when you're working with him. Again, you've got to be asking yourself why. And likewise, if he's reluctant to be tacked up when he wasn't before. Most definitely showing discomfort in his tongue by maybe pushing it to one side or taking it out of his mouth, pulling it back, or actually taking it over the tongue, or even fixing his jaw, are all ways of the horse trying to manipulate himself to move away from something that's uncomfortable. So that's where we've got to address that and see how we can accommodate him. Certainly opening his mouth or being unsettled with the bit. All of these continue on if you see a horse nodding his head, not as a sign of lameness, but just because he's unsettled in his bridling. Also, if he's holding his head to one side, or as I mentioned already, crossing his jaw as well as fixing it. If he's become heavy in your hand when he didn't used to do that before, or you feel that the contact's not coming through, he's blocking in his aids, blocking in the shoulder, and not riding forwards and taking up the contact of the bit when he was at a level of equitation where he did do so before. If perhaps your experience is stiffness and he's not being able to track up properly, he's not able to bring round in his back, use his quarters before, and take one hoof, hind hoof, so it imprints on where the front hoof did. He's not using himself fully when he did before. That might be a sign that all is not well. And certainly if he's working in a hollow outline, or if he was not performing in the way that he used to perform. And all of these are a way of him communicating to us, and they will build and build and build until the point he goes, I've really got to tell you, this is something's desperately wrong, and that may well be even as bucking, napping, or heaven help us, even rearing. I'm sure there are more things you could probably add to that list, but that gives you a good idea of the sort of things that you'll be looking for. And certainly for me, when I look at horses, if they're uncomfy, just the quietest of indications, like tightening across the brow, if a horse has a brow, tightening around the eyes, tightening and angling sideways of the ears, and tightening in the muzzle, again, are the most basic indicators that they're not comfy. So, having looked at that, let's look a bit more about bit design and how bits actually mechanically function with the horse and the bridle. So we've got our different bitting and bridling contact points, so the actual points of pressure which they actually function on. Now, not all bits will work on all of these all of the time, but they are the range which is generally considered that they do. So as far as direct contact points are, we've got the horse's lips, and the lips may be long and slim, or they may be lips that are much shorter and much thicker. So a very long lip will give you, and I'm meaning the space from the corner of the mouth to the front. So a very long lip length will perhaps give more space in which to bit the horse, which is helpful. But if it's extremely long and using a curb chain, you may have to consider, is that bringing it a bit too far back out of the chin groove in alignment for the corner of the mouth to where the chin groove is. If you, likewise, you've got a horse with a much, much shorter mouth, you can understand that you're going to have much less of a space to work with, and therefore you're going to have to find bitting that will accommodate within that area more empathetically. And if you've got a horse with very, very thick lips, then he may not be able to accommodate some bits as comfortably as others. And if his curseurs around the side are much more padded than others might be. And again, the tongue, equally, that will vary a lot, whether it's long and slim, whether it's a very broad and bulky tongue, if it's got actually what we call a very full mouth, and that will create much less room in which for you to actually bit and accommodate him. We also look at the horse's bars, and again, they might be perhaps a more thoroughbred type, a more pointed bars, so they're going to be more acute to pressure, not only from the bit actually on the bars themselves, but also pressure from the bit on the tongue onto the bars on the underside of the tongue. You may have the opposite type of horse, a much, much broader, flatter bar, which will be easier to work with. And also the roof of the mouth. In bitting, we don't generally think of having bits that intentionally impact on the roof of the mouth. It may be that some bits that are not within the realm of normal so-called English riding, perhaps some of your Western style bits, they do have high ports and do impact on the roof of the mouth. But generally, the bitting that we work with, we're not looking to make a contact with the roof of the mouth. And some horses will have a much lower mouth than others. You may have some types of horse, perhaps your warm bloods are big, solid types, and they look big, but they don't actually have as much room in the mouth as you think they might. And then we have the poll, or rather than just the poll, if you think of the bridle area across the top of the horse's head, across which the bridle's headpiece acts. And pressure across that one generally it can encourage the horse's head down. Then we have pressure across the horse's nose, which will be activated by a bridle that has a noseband attached to it, or even form a bitless bridle. Generally, the contact there will encourage the head to become brought inwards. And then we've got the chin groove, the area just behind the actual lip. You can see it marked on the diagram there, the chin groove, and that's the area in which the curb chain would sit. And nowadays we can really add another one, and that's actually the jaw. You will have people refer to a leather curb strap, which is not actually sitting in the chin groove, it's sitting quite a way back, actually on the horse's jaw. And keeping in mind, there's quite a vulnerable area where you go from the chin groove to the actual jaw, where you got the jaw branches. So that area mustn't be impacted upon. But we do actually now have bits that can have a leather strap or leather curb strap attached to act further back here, again, encouraging flexion. So just to illustrate some of the points I've been covering, you can see there very clearly the bars of the horse, the toothless area between the front teeth, the incisors, and in this case you can see a canine tooth or tush, and the back grinding teeth, the premolar teeth. That's the area of the bars. And in the middle of that, you've got a hollowed area, which is the tongue groove. And of course, the width of the tongue groove, how capacious it is or not, will again allow for accommodation or not so much of the horse's tongue, and that will have effect in our form of bridling. You can also see here on the diagram on the left, that says if you're looking up to the horse's upper jaw, you can see premolar 1, or the little wolf tooth, and that's the one that we do refer to in bitting as a consideration. Sometimes there will be removed. Basically, a wolf tooth, I think, is a bit like our wisdom teeth. They are there, we don't really need them anymore, and sometimes they can literally be a pain in the gum. Quite often in bitting, when a wolf tooth is present, it will be removed so that it can't be caught by the bit or impacted on. And sometimes if they haven't erupted, they can actually be more of an issue than if they have erupted through the gum, because they can just actually catch the bit contact on top of the gum where it's sensitive with the wolf tooth pushing upwards. But those are all issues that your equine dental technician will help cover for you, but they are important factors when it comes into bitting. That's just a photo to show you a horse that has had his wolf teeth removed. You can see them on the left and removed on the right. Now, when we're looking at different bit designs, in the past, I mean, going back a while, it's much more a case of, oh, I'll have a pelham bit, or I'll have, you know, a particular style of snaffle or whatever, and they will come with generally a more limited range of mouthpieces. Nowadays, we tend to work much more by thinking about what is the most appropriate mouthpiece for a particular conformation of a horse's mouth, and then selecting the side sections as a second stage. So depending on what work we're doing with the horse, what level the horse is training at. Predominantly we'd be working with snaffles, but sometimes we need to move up to something different. So when we're talking about bit designs, we've got the two sections, we've got the mouthpiece and we've got the side section. I've just picked out two bits and put them on the page to show you there's no connection between them one to the other. They're just two examples of bits. But do keep in mind, it's the mouthpiece of one particular type could be used across a range of different bits. So if you have a bit with one particular style of mouthpiece like that, you could have that mouthpiece in a snaffle, you could have it in you know, a pelham, you could have it across a leverage bit, you could have it across a range. So it's not the mouthpiece that defines different families of bitting. But the side shanks will definitely give the mechanics to the bit, which I'll explain to you now. So leaving the mouthpiece selection to one side for a moment, if I was to put 20 bits on a table, I hope that after this little bit of explanation, even if you couldn't have done it before, you will be able to put them all into their different families or categories of bitting. And we can do this by understanding the characteristics and mechanics, and therefore the actual physical action of the bit. And therefore what the likely, not guaranteed, but the likely reaction by the horse is to that, and therefore a logical reason for considering using them. So the first group, or first family if you wish, is the snaffle family. I've just picked up one particular bit here, so don't make any reference to the mouthpiece or particularly the fact that it's loose ring, but this is an example of a snaffle bit. So a snaffle, which I think is by far the most popular and common family of bitting, the most perhaps simplistic one, certainly where you would start out with your horse. So a snaffle is defined by the fact that it will act on the horse's lips, his tongue and his bars, but it has no additional mechanics to it. It doesn't have any pulley running through it. It has no curb chain. It has no leverage at all. It is just simplistic as it is. It has a direct line of contact from the bit ring or the bit side through the rein to the rider's hand. And the general action of a snaffle bit will be one to encourage the head upwards. Then we can come on to a curb bit. Now in English riding, generally, we will be using a curb bit as part of a double bridle. We don't tend to use a curb bit on its own. There are a few curb bits which sneak through, called different things like a globe pelham, or perhaps some forms of Kimblewick which have one point of attachment. But generally speaking, in English riding, we will have the curb bit as part of a double bridle. And the curb is defined by the fact that it has a shank section. So in this picture I'm showing you, I'm referring to up the bit on the top of the picture. It will have a shank section below the mouthpiece, and it will also have a curb chain. And if you look at the diagram bottom left on this page, you can see very clearly how it functions. So as once it's correctly fitted, as the rein contact is taken up, it will take the contact of the bit and intensify the action within the mouth. So the lower section of the shank will come backwards towards the rider's hand, and then the top come forward. And in doing that, several things are happening. You've got a consistent pressure coming downwards through the bridle, but you've also got the mouthpiece acting as the fulcrum to the shank, which will create a downwards pressure across the horse's mouth. And then as the top section, or the over end of the bit, comes forward, it is then activating the curb chain. And generally the overriding action that would be to encourage the horse's head down and in. And of course, as a double bridle for a skilled rider and a horse at a higher level of schooling and training, it will be able to act as at a greater level of communication. Then we have our pelham, which is really a combination of the previous two bits in the slide to the left. So what it is you've got your curb bit, but unlike the curb there, it has got 2 points. Unlike the Weymouth, it's got 2 points of rein contact. One is on the upper rein, so basically acting as a snaffle would do, and one on the lower rein to activate the curb action in the way I've just described with the Weymouth. And they will be used for horses where you want a little bit more control, perhaps in slightly faster work, but they don't work as a fine-tuning communication as a double bridle would do. But they can still be useful. I'm a purist. If I was using one, I would much prefer to see people training and using them with 2 reins, because then you can get, I believe, a clearer action between the top rein and the lower rein. However, if you wish, you can use the pelham roundings onto which to attach 1 rein, or even riding with split reins, as long as you're not in fast work. Then we can come onto our running gags. So a running gag looks rather similar to a snaffle, except it's got a hole through the top and the bottom of the bit through which a specially made cheek piece will run. So you discard your regular cheek piece on your bridle, and you'd have a rolled cheek piece running through it like this. So you can imagine that as the contact is taken up on the lower ring, it enables the bit to slip upwards along the cheek, and so you get a very strong upwards pressure, but that's combined with obviously a downwards pressure also across the horse's bridle. But nevertheless, the overriding action of a running gag is to lift the horse's head. When would you be using it? You would be using it for a bold horse in fast work, where you do need to have a level of control. I mean, got a big enthusiastic horse going towards a solid fence, and he's doing an impression with a snowplow with his head on the floor. That's a dangerous place to be. So you might need to have something enough to bring his head up. Could you ride it with 2 reins? Absolutely. You can ride with a running gag like that with 2 reins, with 1 rein attached to the snaffle position and 1 rein attached to the lower end of the running cheek through the bit. But that's a piece of equipment for a horse in fast work, certainly nothing we're going to be using on our baby horses. And then we've got our leverage bits. A leverage bit can be defined by the fact that it has a rein contact below the direct line of action to the mouth. So that whereas a snaffle would be acting as a direct line contact, this a leverage bit where the cheek piece will be going through here, the rein will be attaching here, and you can see that that is doing 2 things. Firstly, the mouthpiece is slipping up on the ring, but then secondly, you can see that a downwards action is being placed across the top of the bridle through the cheek pieces with a downwards pressure. So a little bit like that can be quite useful for helping just to position the head and neck of a horse, and often used on little ponies in the show ring for that very reason, because the position in which the horse holds its head and neck will have a direct effect on the position that the mouthpiece of the bit is actually functioning across the horse's mouth. So if you're riding a very novice horse, be much less balanced, he will more in his forehand, more leaning out forward with his head, and therefore it will be acting lower in his mouth. Whereas once the horse becomes more schooled and more balanced, then it will be lifting his head and neck, and you'll have it working in a different position. But we need the position of the horse's head and neck will affect the functionality of the bit in his mouth. And we can also have other lever bits which have a longer section below the mouthpiece, which again will have greater percentage of leverage. So you can see here on this bit type, you've got a section below the mouthpiece, and that is again going to act in this way, but it has no curb chain as such. Although this is the type of bit that sometimes you would get the leather curb, so-called curb strap, perhaps it should be called a jaw strap, placed on the back. And then we can have our bitless bridles, which are quite easy to identify because there's no bit in the horse's mouth at all. There are different types of bitless bridle. Your true hackamore will be something that we wouldn't really use in English style riding, because it would be a bosel around the nose, and it would rely on as much a different way of riding, of neck reining and the movement in the saddle with a very broad bearing saddle, etc. Then you can have nose bridles, which now have no leverage to them at all, they just tighten around the nose. And then you've got your traditional bitless bridle that you can see there, that as the rein contact is taken up, it tilts back, and it placing a downwards pressure on the head, and also a tightening pressure on the front and the jaw of the horse's face, encouraging the head down and in. So most of pretty much all the bits that you have, if you pick them up, look at them, think how they actually function. You know, has it got a curb chain? Right, well, it's not a Pelham or a Weymouth. Has it got a contact point below the direct line of contact to the mouth from the rein to the hand? No. Is it a bit? Yes. Has it got a cheek running through it? No. Well, in that case, you know, obviously it's a snaffle. So you can take that logical progression to give you much more understanding about what you're actually being presented or looking at. And then when we come to mouthpieces, there is just such a huge range of different mouthpieces. You may have a mouthpiece that has no breaking at all, just straight, and therefore it's going to act with more contact on the top of the tongue and less onto the bars. You may have something top left, like that little Happy Mouth one, the Cambridge mouth one there, Happy Mouth one there, that has allowed a little tiny little bit of space for the horse's tongue. You can have the more old-fashioned traditional single jointed bit, which are not nearly so popular today, but if you do get a single jointed bit, do make sure you get one that's got a very nice shaping to it. So if I turn that upside down, you can see how shaped it is. Some bits, snaffle bits that are not made very well, don't have much shape, and therefore not contouring to the horse's mouth. But you can see that there is the opportunity for them to create more of a squeezing or so-called nutcracker action. And you can have bits with lozenges, of which there are many, many types. The central bit of the bit can be referred to as a feature, this little bit here, and there are many, many different designs, but basically you've got, as all the bits on the right, down the right hand side for the screen, have got a break at 2 points, and that enables the bit to sit more around the bit and to remove such a direct pressure and contact on the tongue, and the squeezing on the tongue and squeezing on the bars. And there are many, many different types of lozenge or peanut or roller or barrel or even little ball shapes, and many others that I haven't even mentioned there, but many types. And you can have bits that have got multi-joints, mouthpieces that have got multi-joints, so that you've got a horse that's a bit heavy on the hand. Hello. I don't know what happened there, but I'm back. So if you've got a bit that's a bit heavy on the hand, that might work and function well. And then at the top, we have got a very arched shape, and that shape there is to accommodate the horse's tongue as much as possible. Some horses just don't like pressure on the tongue, and then the idea of that is to accommodate those. So there are many mouthpiece designs. You could have an evening's lecture just on those, but that gives you an idea of some of the options. So if that's not enough to be thinking about all those different options, you then can also be thinking about which particular ally would you like, which type of metal, and what's the advantages of that. It's also really important to know how to measure your bit correctly and get the correct size, because it breaks my heart if I can sometimes advise somebody on a bit and then you see them using it and it's much too big, it's sliding from side to side on the horse's mouth and not functioning as it should do. And they say, oh, well, I didn't need to buy one because I borrowed one off my friend. Well, if the friend's bit's, you know, half an inch too big, that's not helping you. So knowing how to measure your bit and making sure that you get the right size is important. And then there's just general points to consider, as well as understanding mouth assessments and maintenance, bit fitting and tack, additional tack. So looking at the different metals or alloys, these are some of the popular choices that we have on the market. So I'll just take you through those so you can have a bit more of a consideration when you pick one up. So stainless steel is perhaps one of the most popular and or commonly seen bits. Bright, it's shiny, it's not going to oxidize or rust at all, and it's a neutral metal, hence why we have it. Unless you're very posh and you've got silver cutlery at home, you've got stainless steel probably. So it's as a neutral, it hasn't got a taste. However, it is much colder. It's got poor thermal conductivity opportunities, or much a colder metal. And then we can have our high copper alloy bits. They have much greater thermal conductivity opportunities with them. They are more empathetic in the horse's mouth from that perspective, and they're also slightly softer should they make contact with the horse's mouth. And they also tend to be nickel free, whereas stainless steel, you often see it says 18.8 when you buy it, and that's because of the content of 18 chrome and 18 nickel. Then we have our titanium bits, and the titanium bits are becoming much more popular on the market now. They tend to be really very lightweight, but they're very strong, very fit for purpose. They don't obviously oxidize, and many horses do seem to go well in them and appreciate their feeling, and they're much warmer to the touch as well. We also have bottom right of the picture, we have our sweet iron mouthpieces, which is where the metal actually oxidizes or rusts, but that sweet taste the horse actually likes very much. And the bit on the bottom is a good example of combinations materials. So you've got your stainless steel cheeks, your little roller in the middle, which is copper, and then your sweet iron cannons to the bit. And the one on the left there is a sweet iron as well, but it has been treated at point of manufacture, been heat treated, which gives it that blue finish, that blue tinge. And that's something that just makes it more practical and viable to keep and use and store. But once you are actually, see that blueness, once you are actually using it in the horse's mouth, that will go and it will start to look like the one on the right. And then top right, you've got polymers and rubbers, which provide another opportunity for horses. There's a lot of talk about horse salivating and creating the horse to salivate and everything. It's quite right that we do want the horse to be moist in his mouth. We don't want him to be wet. What we're trying to do is to get the bit to be as unobtrusive in his mouth through the contour of it to his conformation, through the empathy of the metal in his mouth, and through the warmth of the metal in his mouth as a piece of metal in his mouth can be. So those are the functions that we're trying to get from our bit, and sometimes just changing the material that you're using can be enough to get you where you need to be with the horse. When you're measuring your bits, this is a guide to give you that detail. So lie your bit flat on the table with a ruler underneath it, and you're measuring from the inside measurement to the inside measurement to get the width across the mouthpiece. If you are looking for the fatness of the mouthpiece, then you need to be measuring at this section of the bit. Even though it tapers, you're measuring at that section of the bit. An easy way to do that is if you get a digital caliper, you can pinch off someone. There's a picture on the screen there. That will give you very clear reading. If not, just look from above over a tape measure and do it in that way. Or you can, in fact, some of the manufacturers actually provide gauges that you can put the bit to give you the different mouthpiece sizes to give you an idea. And they will be measured in the millimeters, from 12, that's very slim, 14, which is fine, 16, which is much more common, 18 mil, which is really quite fat, and 21 mil, which is very fat, and 23, which would be one of great big old fashioned chunky rubber bits. If you're measuring the ring, you're always measuring from the inside to the inside dimension across the diameter. For the length of the shank, you can measure either overall or from the underside of the mouthpiece downwards. A good manufacturer, as they lengthen this section, will also balance out the top as well to give your overall length. And with a ball cheek snaffle, as you see on the left there, again, you can measure from the top to bottom to give you your overall lengths. If you're trying to measure for your horse, there are different gauges and things that you can get to use on a horse. You can even have a scenario like one of these that you can purchase to try measuring up to your horse's mouth. I actually sometimes find it's just easier to take the bit he's got, assess it, lay it to the table, take a measurement, and then if you're going to a store to get one, take two of the different variances of size and fit to try them, and do it in that way. You do hear some people talking about using a piece of string to actually get the measurement and so on, but I'm never quite sure myself about putting string across a horse's mouth. And this chart here gives you just an idea of some of the different sizings that you might corresponding to the different height of animal, but do keep in mind that you can have quite a small chunky pony, native pony, that will have quite a wide width of bit compared to a very fine, elegant hack type thoroughbred, which may actually have quite a small width of bit. So height doesn't equal that size, but getting the correct sizing is really important. So what are the different things you might need to think about when you're considering changing your bit or advising someone or helping a friend or a member of your family to select a bit? So the different things that your bit and bridle fitter might ask you, they'll want to know the size of your horse, they want to know how old it is to give a bit of background, whether it's got any physical dental history. Certainly knowing its breed will give a good indicator what the horse is like, so lead it on to what type of mouth conformation it would have. Definitely want to know what sort of discipline the horse is doing, what work he's doing. Might need that you need different bits for different scenarios. Knowing his past history is important, so what he's experienced in the past and what his background history is, and if he's got any injuries or issues that are going forward. Certainly the animal's temperament. Some horses are much more sensitive than others, and his individual conformation requirements. And knowing also about his stable management, everything, the saddling, bridling, bridle fit, turnout, and feeding. I was speaking to someone last week who was really struggling with their horse. When they started telling me what they were feeding it, I really wasn't surprised. They actually went to a nutritional helpline, got some help with and guidance with the feeding, and actually, in fact, they were fine in the tack that they had and bit that they had. It's just they got that section of it wrong. So this is what I mean by the overall approach. And certainly routine inspections of the mouth that we're going to be talking about in a moment. And from the rider's perspective, you'll want to know the size of the ride. You might have a little person on a great big horse, and their requirements might be different from someone who's much larger, how old they are, what ability they're at. You can have some very young children that are extremely able riders, but it may be that's not the scenario. What their previous experience is, if they're ready for the bit that you might be thinking of suggesting, and also the suitability or not of the horse or pony for them. Sometimes you can see very difficult situations where it's not a bitting or bridling issue, it's just the fact that someone is with a horse, it's a lovely horse, but it's just not the right horse for them. They've got too much horse for their level of riding or their capability. And bitting to comply with competition rules. You've got to keep in mind there are shed loads of rules. You've got to make sure that you comply to them. It's no good trotting up the centre line to be eliminated because you've got the wrong piece of kit on. I mentioned about equine mouth inspections, and there are 3 types. What I mean by that is Firstly, you can have a very, very full one done by your equine dental technician. It may be that they're a vet that's specializing in equine dentistry, or they may be an equine dental technician, and purely that's their job. But anyway, to me, whether your horse is young or old, in fast, full competition work, or retired, or just a leisure horse, every year you should have his teeth checked professionally. He's got his teeth in his mouth 24/7. However much work he is or isn't doing, and correct maintenance of his teeth is a welfare issue, and it's certainly something that's critically important for bitting, because you can prevent issues becoming problems that can then become a bitting and ectration problem. So once a year, always a good equine dental technician who will check the whole of the oral cavity, check his teeth, and if the teeth are done regularly, it's really not a big thing at all. If a horse is left for a much longer period of time, it becomes more of a challenge and an issue. And they will advise you as to how often they should come and see you if it's anything different from every 12 months. Then you've got your type of mouth inspection that your bit or bridle fitter will do. They will have got a picture of Charlotte Woolman, who's a lovely bit and bridle fitter down in our neck of the woods, and here she is looking at someone's horse. So before she even starts thinking of putting bits in a horse's mouth, she'll take great care and trouble to actually look from both sides naturally in great detail. And now it might well be that they will be nowhere near as invasive as an equine dental technician, but they may well actually place their fingers further into the horse's mouth, move the tongue, or push it so they can see clearly all around the inside of the mouth and the oral cavity, etc. And then you've got the type of inspection that I'd like horse owners to be doing. Now, the first thing I want to totally underline is please, please don't go putting your fingers in your horse's mouths. I don't want to meet people that attended this talk that are going around like that because they've had a horrendous injury from the horse actually biting down hard on their fingers. What you can be doing is, before you get to the mouth, just feel around your horse's head, just feel all over his bridle path, get used to feeling down the side of his face for any sensitivity, any lumps, bump, anything that wasn't normal. You can feel the big joint here, the temporomandibular joint. If you very carefully palpate it and stand in front of your horse, but slightly to one side, because if he does suddenly go like that, you don't want to conk on the nose. But if you just very gently, with the pads of your fingers, palpate each side, does the occlusion feel even? Is there any tenderness or soreness? Look at his eyes, look at his ears. Does he tighten his chin when you do that? And then feel all the way around, feel around his nose, his muzzle, and very importantly through the chin groove area as well. So what you're looking for is knowing what's normal for your horse, so that if something is different to what was there, either a reaction by him or a tender spot or anything of that type, you know to pick up on it because you know what's normal for your horse. Then just carefully, as it shows in those pictures, very gently part his lips. Never ever take the tongue out of the mouth. You can do a huge amount of trauma if you did that. Excuse me. So never take the horse's tongue out of his mouth, leave it there, and then just work to see, excuse me. Got a bright light on. Work to see how full his mouth is. How full his mouth is. How much does the tongue fill the air of his mouth? If it's like a double duvet spilling over a single bed, you know he's got a large tongue and a full mouth. Look to see if you can, if there's any bruising or contusing to his bars, or if there's anything different that you didn't notice or observe when you looked before. And the more you get used to doing this, the more your horses will accept it as a normal part of the stable management routine. And, you know, if you pick up your horse's feet, he will be quite ready for you to accommodate that. And horses that have their mouth checked regularly will be used to doing it too. So just part the lips, get used to having a good look round, look for any bruising, contusing, any trauma that you can see, any soreness of the tongue, and then also walk round to the other side and do it the other side as well. And particularly do that after you've been to perhaps a more involved schooling session, or if you've been cross country or anything of that type. But whatever you do, do it regularly. Now, the picture in the middle I've got there just to show you an appropriate alignment of the front teeth. What you're looking for is that you want the horse's teeth to be in an even alignment. If you meet a horse that's got his teeth off to one angle that's slanting, then it may well be a very good indicator that there's something going on much further back in his mouth. He's got a hook or his teeth haven't maintained, and that's again when you want to get more advice. So these are just a few examples of horses' mouths. I've talked about long mouths and short mouths and thick lips and thin lips, and here he got some examples. And the more you look at horses, different horses, the more you're going to build up that database of understanding. So if you are looking at other people's horses' mouths, I would recommend having appropriate PPE, gloves, and putting fresh ones on between each horse. Got to be sensible with biosecurity. But here you can see a short mouth. The length of the mouth of the horse from the corner to the front is really very, very short. So you wouldn't be wanting to try and fit a double bridle with him, bless him. The top right, we've got a very, very thick mouthpiece and very, very fleshy around the contours. So you'd have to take that into consideration, not having a bit that's bulky, or to be a slim, neat bit that's going to accommodate that. And then a horse on the bottom right with a very long tongue. And then again, that's another picture of a full mouth. This is just showing you hooks. So this is a mouth that hasn't been routinely maintained at all. You've got very, very big hooks, and that can then have a knock-on effect as to different problems within the horse's mouth. And here you can see some very, very sharp teeth on the left that have been not catered for, so much so that actually caused really unpleasant ulceration inside the horse's mouth. If your horse's teeth are done regularly, that sort of scenario won't happen. Just imagine that, and then someone putting a tight fitting noseband over the top. It doesn't bear thinking about. So the importance of a correct bit and bridle and tack fit. So whether you are a standard Shetland, this is one of my little Shetlands that's now gone to live in Shetland, or if you are a lovely big beautiful big horse, you still need the care and maintenance, and just as much, and through poor bridling and bitting, it can affect so much more than just what you can see and perceive as the horse's mouth. You have the hyoid apparatus there, which you can see shown on the right of the screen, which is a very fine series of H-shaped type bones, which actually suspend the tongue, the larynx, and all of this scenario, the horse's tongue. If you had a horse's tongue, it's a big muscle all the way back through. All of that is connected right the way back through the horse's body, so that if he's poorly bitted and bridled, it can have a long-term effect right through the whole of his body. To more extreme cases, you can even have bridle lameness, so horses actually not sound behind because he's wrong at the front. So it really is the overall picture. So when you're getting the sizing of your bittings, you got them right, you also got to make sure you actually fit them correctly. And we've got some photos here to illustrate that. So you've got an egg butt snaffle on the left. So with a bit that's got a cornered side to it, we'll be looking for it to just sit up into the corners of the mouth with maybe possibly one crinkle. So always get the height of the bit first before you can be judging the width, because the horse's jaw is a V shape like that. So obviously it will affect the width position of where it's sitting in his mouth. But what you mustn't do is to over heighten the bit in the horse's mouth, because that will cause discomfort and trauma. Some people actually look at the inside of the mouth, at the grooves that go along the inside of the mouth, and just fit the bit to the second groove down to get it in the right position. But whichever way you do it, what you're trying to achieve is to have the bit sitting comfortably in the horse's mouth, so it's not so low that he's banging into his teeth, or he's actually, just feeling for it because it feels very uncomfortable. But equally, it's not so tight that it's pulling too much at the corners of his mouth. And with a loose ring bit, see how the loose ring bit, you'll be just fitting it, find the loose ring bit, just fitting it so that the sides of the mouth just sit into, to allow a bit of allowance for that little loose ring. That's when we're referring to the width. So here you can see a loose ring bit but illustrating the height issue. The one on the left is actually much too low. That horse, I would imagine, would not want to be standing very happily with that, but also it's much, much too wide in the width. And then the one on the right is desperately fitting too high. Years ago, people used to talk about having 2 crinkles at the corners of the mouth. Well, that's just, don't even take any notice of that now. Some people will say, oh, well, if I fit it wide, it'd be a bit kinder on his mouth. And that really is not the case, because it could move adversely from side to side. If it's got a feature in the middle, that might well be the wrong position. Definitely not, too wide, just got to get it right. So on the left, we can see a bit that's too narrow. It doesn't take any imagination to imagine how that could easily pinch the horse's lips. And then the bottom right there, again, it's just too wide. Fitting double bridles, time doesn't allow to go into that in great depth, but basically you have got to allow room for the bits to act independently, one from another, with bridle at the top. And with any curb bit, whether it's a Pelham or a Weymouth, you tilt it to an angle of 45 degrees to take up that contact. It must not be too tight to act earlier than that, and not looser, otherwise the curb chain can kick back out of the chin groove. So a bit grim, but these are some examples of trauma that can be caused by poorly fitting or poorly used equipment. And keep in mind that trauma to the mouth can happen when it's when the rider isn't in the saddle, as you can see in this picture up here. I don't know the next picture. I hope very much the reins broke, but if not, you can see the amount of pull that's on the horse's mouth. The importance of bridling, there's going to be another issue of horse tribe, going into great detail of that, which is fantastic, but really emphasizing that a correctly fitting bridle is of critical importance for all the different foramen and nerve points all throughout the horse's head, and that our bridles are changing very, very much. There are many, many, many anatomical bridles out there. That said, it doesn't matter how brilliant a bridle it is, if it doesn't fit your horse correctly, if it's not the right, it's not just a question of doing it up correctly, if it isn't the right contour for your individual horse, it's not going to be able to function properly. Just imagine having a really great saddle, but it didn't fit your horse. Well, it's not going to function properly, and that's a welfare issue for your horse. And all the tack that we have, not just the saddle and the bridle, very much nosebands, always to allow room for at least 2 fingers underneath the front of the noseband. A lot of trauma can be caused if they're too tight. Getting martingales correctly adjusted so that they are not causing adverse pressures when they shouldn't, and taking time and trouble to select a good girth that gives a good full contour across the girth area. All of these are really, really important. So when you're introducing your horse to a new bit, these are some of the things to be thinking about. Taking it obviously slowly and carefully, and being patient, having the bridle, having it fitted to the bridle, and gradually just introducing it to him on the ground, just give him a chance to be thinking how that actually functions. And then you can stand on the ground and actually take the rein contact up. So you're giving your horse a chance to actually feel and experience it. You might have a bit that is completely different to what he's had before. And if you can just give him a chance to actually feel and acknowledge that in his mouth, that's helpful. Trying the bit in an enclosed area initially is common sense, just so you get to know what it feels like and so on. And then obviously staying in walk and trot in the early stages of your work with that until he's ready to go forward to a higher level. Just give him a chance with it. For clarity, as long as your tack's correct, fitting with the same tack so that you can be able to have clarity of understanding that the variance, if he is different in it, is not caused by any other scenarios. And working or schooling on the bit before you go off to bed. A number of times people, oh, I bought a bit, I'm going off to the competition with it tomorrow. Yeah, take a little time for your horse to get used to it and see how it goes first. So do put that into consideration. And remember that there's no substitute for sound basic training that will and that's successful to rely very, very much on the skill and empathy of the rider. So as riders, the role of the rider, we need to assess our functionality on the horse to enable him to work well, and through the consequences of poor riding through the whole of the horse's body. So as much as possible with our riding, we want to be thinking of giving the energy through our seat and legs so that we get him to work from behind, to lift up through his body, to come round through his body. And so as much as it's possible in the work that they're doing, that the bit is at the end of the line of command rather than the beginning. And I'm desperately keen to highlight, to be rewarding with our horses. If you're doing lateral work with your horse, you're asking, he gives you what you're asking for. Reward him by being quiet and still. If you don't, he's never going to understand what you're trying to get him to achieve. And as I say, as much as possible, the bit being at the end of the line of command. So we've got lots of different factors all in a bundle together to think about, and I hope that's highlighted some of them for you. But remember, horses are individuals. What will work for 10 horses, the 11th it won't do. So always be open-minded. And if you can, try and think of the bit, not so much as a device put in the mouth of the horse, but one put in the hands of the rider, and that it will only be as successful or harmful as the rider attached to the end of the reins. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. That was fabulous. So much information. Absolutely brilliant. We've got some questions already that have been coming up whilst you've been chatting. So
Okay.
We'll ask those ones. Guys, if you've got more questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So Tricia, Kate says, if someone's using a pelham with a converter and a single rein, would a Kimberwick be a more appropriate option in your opinion?
Okay, so if we have a pelham bit, it might be it has a converter or a rounder, so a leather strap joining the top to the bottom. The advantage of that is that you have got just the one single rein. I wouldn't, it depends on the Kimberwick. Kimberwicks have changed so much. I mean, I'll just go and get one. I mean, when I was a kid, a Kimberwick, this is missing its curb chain, so it would have a curb chain. When I was a kid, a Kimberwick, sorry, looked like that. It's got a very, very short shank, but it has got quite an angular eye, so it's got a more intense movement of the headpiece downwards, but it was just that one single side. Nowadays you tend to get more of a style of, well, just to clarify, that's a Eutoxeter, which has a very high port, which I don't think is particularly empathetic also. But what you tend to do now is get more than a Kimberwick. You tend to get this, what is referred to as a Eutoxeter there. It's got the two slots, so you have got the option. But it depends how much leverage you want, really. I mean, you could try both. I mean, if you're going one stage up and you just want a little bit more something, because say you're going cross country, if you can find a Kimberwick that's going to suit your horse well, and there are many different mouth types you could go for, then that might just be the answer if you really want to avoid two reins. But look at the devil in the detail. Look at, I mean, I could present that, and that's a really intense little bit to me. It's very angular here. It's got a very high, it's not, I would call that a port that might well make contact with the roof of the mouth, as opposed to something that's allowing room for the tongue, versus something like this, which has got a much nicer mouthpiece with 2 points, if you wanted 2 points or two options of rein contact. So there's nothing wrong with using roundings. I just think you get more of a mudge or a fudge of the actions together. Whereas if say you were comfortable riding with two reins, it means that you could predominantly on the snaffle rein, but should you sort of need, canter up the side of a field and need a little bit more when you get to the end of it, then you've got that lower rein. And I think a lot to do with riding with two reins, riding with doubles, is we need to learn to do it off the horse first. So put the bridle on the back of the chair, have your two reins whilst you're watching Strictly Come Dancing, Jungle, Get Me Out of Here, whatever it is. Work slipping and moving the reins until it becomes a very natural thing for you to do. I mean, if you think people that drive, you've got one pair of hands, you've got two pairs, you've got one pair of feet, and you've got three pedals on the floor, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to change gears, stick, but it becomes second nature. And so I think that with riding with two reins, don't be too far, but go and get help with it. Go and have a lesson, go and have instruction, and practice at home before you get near the horse as well.
Brilliant, thank
I
you.
hope that answers the question.
It does indeed. Next question is from Laura. I've been considering one of the baby fulmer bits, but I'm a bit concerned that the shorter arms may pull through and catch in my horse's mouth. Do you have any experience or an opinion on these?
Fulmer, I did have one. Let me see if I can find it. I was hoping I might pick up a fulmer so I could actually sort of show it to people so they know what we're talking about. So in my understanding of fulmer is it's a snaffle with a cheek, but then it has an external ring. Yep, at the side. So I think you've got to contour it to your horse. I mean, if your horse has got the capacity to think it's a danger that he might pull it through his mouth and so on, then I mean, normally when I've seen the shorter cheeks, they've been scaled down for the size of the horse's face. So I think you've got to sort of work out that risk, and if you think with your particular horse it is going to be high risk, then don't put yourself there. The other thing to remember, which is really important with the fulmer snaffle, is you have the little fulmer loops. So okay, so this is a cheeked snaffle. It's a bull cheek snaffle, so that you can often get away with riding without the fulmer loops. A fulmer snaffle would have the loose, this would be actually a loose ring attached, so the capacity for it to slip round is much greater, and therefore with a fulmer I'd always recommend using the little fulmer loops. So hopefully if you have the little fulmer loops that they attach from this section here onto the cheek piece of the bridle, so hopefully if you had that it would be in the correct position, and they can be very useful because it gives directional guidance. Or maybe you might find it easier just to pop to a full cheek snaffle than a fulmer if you think that's a worry.
What's the difference in terms of the stuff, the ring being loose or the ring being fixed?
Well, I think the fulmer snaffle is to sort of have your cake and eat it. It's got everything. It's got cheeks, it's got an egg butt side, and it's got the loose ring. So it's got but the difference is it has got that little bit more play and a little bit more movement. So it's got not quite the scenario of a loose ring snaffle, but more so, whereas this is literally more fixed. So this is basically, if I do that, you've got sort of almost an egg butt snaffle, or tiny D snaffle, and it's just got cheeks top and bottom, and the functionality of them is they can help give directional guidance. Which, if I mean, I had a horse that was a Dutch Gelderlander who'd only ever been in a team of 4 driving, and then we started going cross country together, and that was quite interesting. So if he had something I hear which is not acute or severe on him, but there were definitely times when I was heading towards a certain bit of a fence, like our first cross country where there was 3 bits of hedge for you to jump. We were doing the novice one, but he clocked onto the big one, and that definitely, I was very grateful for those cheeks at the side there. So that's a different. Yeah.
Laura's followed that question up and said, she said, I mean the one like the one you had on the photo that showed titanium bits.
Oh right, yes, those little tight. I know the Vega ones, so they're very short ones. I mean, as long that lots of people are using them, they don't seem to be an issue. But but horses' mouths all vary, so just try it on your horse and see how it is. And if you feel that there is a danger of it for you, then don't use it. It's obviously something you're concerned about.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Ali's asked, how does a Waterford work, and why would you use it on a heavy contact horse?
Right. I had a Waterford a while ago. I swear I want these bits, and I think when they see me come, they will run and hide. So your Waterford is your multi-jointed bit. I would just love to have found it so everyone could just see. Here we go. Here it is. So your Waterford has got multi-links, and if you're buying one, while I'm at it, always hold it in the middle and make sure it's got an even break. And also, unlike this one, make sure it's got a much more extended section here, so that the edge of the horse's mouth isn't on the first knobble. So a lot of them now will have this bit will be flat and smooth, and then it will press. So why would you use this? Basically, it's much more difficult for the horse to lean on it. If you look at that, it's much more difficult for it to fix or to lean onto it. These either really work in faster work, or they're an interesting bit because you could use that for a baby horse. literally just mouthing and feeling it and experiencing it, and that's fine. You could go forward into really fast work with a strong contact, and you've basically got a knobbly chain around your horse's tongue and jaw. So it's finding what the horse goes, oh yeah, that's okay, we're fine, let's go off and have some fun in. So it's fine. But for some horses, it's the fact that they can't actually fix or lean on it in the same way as others. However, if you've got a horse that's pulling and pulling and pulling with this, then I would go and find something else.
Fantastic, thank you. And how would you choose between, you know, the bit in the middle, so the lozenge, a ball, a roller? How would you choose what's most appropriate for your horse?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is you've got your basic sort of lozenge, which just takes away the single nutcracker action, or provides some bending if you had a straight bar bit. But then you've got there are so many different types now. So you'll want to be considering the different width of it, and that will depend on the anatomical structure of horse's tongue. You'll be wanting to think of the different design. I mean, I've got one here which is very clever. It's the Neuschule turtle top, so it bends and it flexes, but there's a point to which it won't go further. So to answer your question, this is probably, if you're unsure where you would really benefit having a bit of bridle fitter look at your horse, it's about what's going to fit your horse's mouth the best, what is going to be most comfortable in, and you can have all sorts of logic to stuff, but then sometimes it's just that the horse goes, yeah, I like that, that's great. And then also keep in mind that it's not just the center, it's the feature in the middle, it's what the side of the cannons and how they're designed. So you have some that are very clever, that they're broader, but then they're slimmer as it crosses through the contour of the horse's mouth. So there are a lot of different options that you can have. It's not just about the feature in the middle.
Yeah, and you mentioned before that you would obviously not have a new bit and go straight to a competition. How long do you think it takes a horse to get used to a bit?
I think that would depend on I was giving you politicians' answers here, but I think that would depend on the horse. I think the take-home message is, don't just put it on the bridle, take it to the show and treat it like a party frock that you've just put on. So I mean, it would depend on the horse. So if you are working with the horse, he's worked well in it, he's schooled well, you went out for a hack, everybody was happy, you've done a little bit, say, suppose you got it cross country, you did a bit of sort of jumping at home and it all worked well, happy days. Just really a bit of common sense, to be honest with you. Your objective is that you're making sure that the horse is happy, comfortable and understands it, and that you're implementing it correctly as well. And if you're not sure, get help from and a guidance from your riding coach.
Brilliant, thank
in
you.
using it, you know.
Yeah.
Not all lessons are in the manage, a lot of them are out cross country, so you know, just get help and support. But I would say that what you're trying to do is to get to a point, however long it does or doesn't take your horse, to actually be understanding, comfortable and functioning well with you and that bit. Before you just charge off. It's just like, oh, in the saddlery I had, you'd sort of see people coming, oh, I need a double bridle, and what for? Oh, I'm going showing and I need a double bridle, and I need a velvet hat, and I need a new pair of joppers. And then you go and perhaps to the show at the weekend and you see this poor horse going around and it being fitted like, as I say again, like a party frock, and there hadn't been the background and thought to it, and it's just really awful. So that's rather an extreme example, but I'm just highlighting, just give your horse a chance to do what you're going to do and get used to in it before you actually go off to the competition or go off for your leisure ride that you're using it for, or whatever else it might be.
Great advice, thank you. Another question here from Carol. Is it possible that a horse's wolf teeth may not have come through on a 6-year-old? My dentist said my horse didn't have wolf teeth, which may not have come through or have already been removed. He does throw his head up on contact when ridden.
I'm not an echo-dental technician, but I think the wolf teeth can sometimes come through very late. They can be little tykes. I mean, sometimes they can hardly be anything there. So when exactly they'll be coming through is a question for echo-dental technicians, but it could well be that they haven't come through by that stage. The things to watch out for is if you get some horses, if you haven't had it for right the way through, you can have some horses that have had them removed and there's a tiny bit's got left in there, and that can cause a basket load of trouble. But what was the problem she was having with her wolf teeth?
He throws his head up on contact when ridden. So
well, he's definitely telling you something. So but you say you haven't got the wolf teeth there. So sometimes has she had an equine dentist see the horse?
Yeah, the dentist said she's seen the horse, doesn't have wolf teeth, but may not have come through or have already been removed.
Well, sometimes that's it, isn't it? So if you've got a wolf tooth that hasn't erupted, sometimes it can be pushing up against the gum, and they can actually cause as much, if not more, than if they have erupted. Or when I say erupted, I mean progressed through the gum, because you've got a tight bit of gum over a piece of tooth that then is being made contact with by the bit. So that can be an issue if they haven't erupted, but the horse is showing you something. Or you can sometimes have, as I mentioned, horses that have had the wolves, and they can be quite, I mean, some wolf teeth are really, I've got one in the other room today, they're tiny, they can be really small, and if you have them extracted but a bit doesn't come out, that can be, as I say, as much trouble as if they hadn't been extracted at all, because you've got that tiny shaft bit left in there that is really causing a problem. It might be that it's something other than wolf tooth. I don't know, that might need to be explored, but the only way to really know about that is perhaps to talk to your vet or your equine dentist, or probably would be the vet, and get an x-ray to find out exactly what is going on there. But what you do know is your horse is tossing his head, and he's doing that for a reason, and the sooner you can address it, the better, because otherwise it will escalate and sort of almost become a habit. So there's something going on there somewhere, so you need to get it looked at in more depth, is my answer.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we're through all our questions for now. So unless anybody's got a very last minute question, what
I would like to say before I go is, you can see on the screen here the different contacts where you can get help, where you can get support. If you go to the BETA website and click the members directory, you can pull up a whole list of different service providers that we have who are BETA members. So if you want help, that's the place to go and find it. If you can't find the help that you want, you've got my contacts on the screen there. Please give me a ring. I can talk about bitting till the cows come home, as you might have probably gathered. But I'm always really happy to help. So just give me a contact. And if you do want to learn a little bit more, BETA does do a one-day online course, just to give a bit more intro into bitting and bridling. It certainly will not make you a bit of bridle fitter, but it will give you a much more of a background along the lines of what we've covered today, but in much more detail. So that is available to you guys as well.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds amazing. Can you just click onto the last slide, and that'll just tell people what's coming up, I think.
Yes, of course. Questions?
We've done those.
And then, yes, there we are.
Brilliant. Yeah, so we've just the next couple of weeks of that are coming up. So we've got Catherine Baker coming to talk to us about bridle fitting. So I think these two webinars fit together brilliantly. We've got bitting today, and then we've got really great detail from Catherine next week about bridle fitting. So looking forward to that. And then we've got Mark Jerem, who's a farrier. He's coming back for the second time. He's going to talk about gait analysis, which is really, really fascinating. It enables you to look at how evenly your horse is moving, and then can help your farrier and yourself identify if there's any issues, if there's anything that needs working on. So another really, really fascinating webinar coming up there. So just leaves me to say a huge thank you, Tricia. That's been amazing, really, really good. And it's the sort of webinar I need to go back and watch again just to fill in the bits of detail and go, yeah, okay, right, I remembered that. So fantastic. Thank you. And Catherine's saying great talk. Well done. So that's lovely. Thanks very much for coming along, everybody. That questionnaire will come up right at the end, just as soon as you click out. It'll only take you a few seconds, so if you could answer that, we'd be really grateful. Otherwise, we hope to see you very soon at another Horse Tribe webinar. Thank you, Tricia. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks, Kate.